In this video we count down the 25 rarest breeding birds in the Netherlands. Before each species, I play you the sound of the species and I show you the habitat so you can guess which species it is. This is the spotted crake. This species returns to the Netherlands in the last week of March and the final migrants pass through in October on the way to Africa. By then, most of the Dutch breeding birds have already left. Although the first spotted crakes can be heard as early as March, new birds may still turn up in fresh places well into July. The spotted crake leads a very secretive life and is usually detected only by its call, a short zweep note, repeated over and over and carrying a long distance when the wind is right. The best chance of seeing the species is in summer, at muddy edges along reed beds. Especially the young birds of that year show themselves more often than the adults. This species needs wet habitats with a maximum water depth of about 15 cm, flooded river plains, edges of sedge, bulrush and reed marshes, and inundated grasslands can all be occupied. Numbers fluctuate from year to year, but on average they are about 50% lower than they were some 30 years ago. Recently flooded areas, however, seem to suit them well. That we find the spotted crake here at number 25, with an average of up to 340 breeding pairs a year, is mainly because I wasn't sure where to place little and Bayland's crake. Their numbers vary strongly, and breeding is not confirmed every year, so technically they don't meet the criteria for this overview. If you want to know the criteria I used to make this list, then check the description. Here we heard the wryneck, a species that has been making an impressive comeback in recent years. Dutch breeders return from Africa around mid-April. Until mid-May, many more are still passing through. Some decide to stay and breed here after all, but a large part continues further north. If you want to find the species yourself, the best time is late April and early May, along woodland edges on sandy soils, especially where there are birches with woodpecker holes. The wryneck doesn't excavate its own hole, but uses those made by the great spotted woodpecker in particular. Holes in oaks and other dead trees are also used. The same nest hole can be reused for several years in a row. There are even cases where a birch tree had to be felled for safety reasons, and the section containing the hole was cut out and hung up in another tree as a nest box, where the birds went on to breed again the following year. Males and females can sing in duet, so not every singing bird is a male. Here is a sound that very few birdwatchers in the Netherlands will recognize. This is the Kentish plover. With up to around 215 breeding pairs a year, it is by no means the rarest breeding waders in the Netherlands. The Dunlin, for example, is an extremely rare breeder with only a single pair once in a while. The common Sandpiper also breeds with just a handful of pairs. However, those species are far more widespread during migration and therefore do not qualify for this list. 50 years ago, there were still 4 times as many Kentish plovers breeding in the Netherlands, but especially due to recreational pressure and off-leash dogs on beaches, the species has been pushed back to closed-off and inaccessible shores. In Great Britain, it has unfortunately gone extinct as a breeding bird, but in theory it could return there one day. Even on our Wadden Isles, it is becoming increasingly difficult to find. The main stronghold of the species in the Netherlands is currently in Zeeland. A species that is more common in winter than in the breeding season, yet still scarce, is the peregrine falcon. At present, there are a maximum of about 175 breeding pairs and 3 times as many wintering birds. It is also not a species most birdwatchers will discover by sound. The first breeding record in the Netherlands dates back to 1990. The peak so far was in 2021 with 225 breeding pairs. However, the species now seems to have been affected by bird flu as well, probably from eating infected prey. Conservation is aided by the installation of nest boxes on tall buildings, though some birds also breed on the ground, especially on the Wadden Islands. This species sings its own song, deep and rasping, yet with high whistles, the great reed warbler, a true inhabitant of old reed standing in the water. At present, only about 25% of the breeding population from the 1990s remain. However, for the past 10 years, the numbers of breeding pairs has been stable at a maximum of around 135 pairs per year. This suggests that conservation measures are working, though of course we would like to see numbers increase again. As mentioned, the species needs robust old reed that grows in water. The size of the reed bed itself seems less important. The fact that singing males are found in new places each year means that if enough young birds fledge, new areas can certainly be colonized. So you definitely have a chance of adding the species to your self-found list by searching suitable reed beds from the last week of April onwards. Its song resembles that of the reed warbler, but is much louder, slower and more rasping. If you're in doubt, it's probably just a reed warbler. This is the largest owl in the Netherlands, the mighty Eurasian eagle owl, one of the biggest owls in the world, and although it appears in this list of the 25 rarest breeding birds of the Netherlands, there is no reason for concern. In fact, the species is expanding strongly. At first, it recolonized quarries in Limburg and the Achterhoek, but nowadays it also breeds in most large forest areas, both on the ground and in tree nests. Occasionally, one even turns up in a city park. Whether it could colonize the British Isles once the Netherlands is full remains uncertain. The best time to search for them is March, although you can already hear them in the earlier winter months. Bright moonlight nights are particularly good. Just be aware that the call can resemble that of the long-eared owl. But while the long-eared owl only says "hoo," the eagle owl really calls out its own name. "Hoo, hoo." This is the black-winged stilt, with its sharp, piercing call, a species that has been breeding in our country for quite some time, though its numbers fluctuate. A key factor is spring droughts in southern Europe. In dry years we see more breeding cases here, in wet years fewer. In 2023 a record was set with 170 breeding pairs, but in 2024 the number was back down to 88. The species can be found in shallow wetlands throughout the Netherlands. April and May are especially good months to look for it. In good years, several pairs may nest in the same area. Once you know its call well, confusion with other species is highly unlikely. This is the common crane, with its very distinctive call, though it can sometimes be confused with the whooper swan. While large numbers migrate through the extreme southeast of the Netherlands in late February, the difference between wintering birds and breeding birds is small, which is why I've included this success story in the list. Currently, with around 70 breeding pairs, it ranks number 18. The species needs wet habitats with plenty of peace and quiet. If you live near such an area where cranes are not yet breeding, listen for this call at dawn or dusk. In dry years, more chicks fall prey to predators, such as foxes, so good water management in nature reserves is vital. It is also important that the adults can safely guide their young from the nesting site to feeding areas. In the Vochtelovenveen, the site of the first Dutch breeding case in centuries in 2001, this can still be a problem today. This is the corncrake, cracks cracks, named after its distinctive call. The sound has sometimes been described as nails running over a comb, but if you heard it on... This is the corncrake, with the letter name cracks cracks, named after its distinctive call. The sound has sometimes been described as nails running over a comb, but if you heard it once, you'll know there's nothing else quite like it. Despite its name, the corncrake is more closely related to rails, like the water rail, than to quails. Its behavior, however, resembles that of quails, as it keeps hidden in fields rather than reed marshes. Generally, you'll find the species in slightly wetter habitats. Hay meadows and stream valleys are a good place to look. In northeastern Netherlands, they can also be found in drier fields, like quails. The first birds may appear as early as the last week of April, but most return in the second half of May. Because they arrive late and breed late, they are highly vulnerable to mowing. If you find a corncrake in the Netherlands, it is recommended to report the location. You can do this via the local landscape manager if you know who that is, or simply by entering your observation on waarneming.nl, which automatically shares it with organizations like Zovon. That was the call of the Montagu's harrier. You may have expected a reed bird, as few birders would immediately recognize this as the Montagu's harrier. The species is not particularly vocal. What you hear here is the display call. The fact that Montagu's harrier still breeds in the Netherlands is largely thanks to the efforts of Ben Cox and the Montagu's harriers working group he founded. Last year there were 54 breeding pairs, all in the 3 northern provinces. A few years earlier they also bred in Flevoland. What they need is a good population of rodents and protection of the nest against mowing. The same rule applies as for the corncrake. If you think you found a possible nest, especially outside the traditional breeding areas, report it to the Montagu's harrier working group or Zovon. Entering it via waarneming.nl ensures it reaches the right organizations automatically. Next is the black-crowned night heron. This species used to breed naturally in the Netherlands, but became extinct due to changes in the landscape and human influence. Later, it occasionally bred in or near zoos, where the species is also kept. Whether these were all escaped birds or wild individuals attracted to conspecifics is unclear. The species status in the Netherlands is therefore somewhat mixed. Breeding cases are increasing, but without ringing it is impossible to say for certain whether these are pure wild birds or descendants of escaped ones. The black-crowned night heron prefers places with a lot of branches over and in the water to hunt and rest. During the day it rests, at night it hunts, although during the breeding season it may also hunt in daylight. You can often hear them calling or flying from the roost to feeding sites, especially at dusk. Be careful not to confuse this with the flight call of the Eurasian bittern. This was the whiskered tern, one of 3 marsh terns found in the Netherlands. The species migrates through in varying numbers each year. In 1938, a few dozen pairs bred here, but afterwards, like the white-winged tern, it bred only sporadically, often in colonies of black terns. That changed in 2012, when relatively many birds passed through the Netherlands, and suddenly a group of several dozen pairs decided to breed in the relatively new water retention areas around Zuid-Laardermeer. The provisional peak was reached in 2021 with 71 pairs. Since then, the species has expanded into surrounding water retention areas, such as the Onlanden. In some years, the species has even replaced Zuid-Laardermeer with other breeding sites like Dannemeer. Breeding success varies yearly depending on water levels, and this year, to my knowledge, the entire colony abandoned the site early without relocating elsewhere. Currently, the estimated total is 40 to 50 pairs. The call is a short, sharp krek. The white-winged tern has a slightly more rolling call, and the black tern's call is longer, typically with 3 syllables, while the whiskered tern's call is just 1 syllable. This was the red kite, a beautiful bird of prey that is very common to the south and east of us, and happily is becoming increasingly common here as well. The first wave of adult migrants passes through in late February, with younger birds following until early May. Especially with an easterly wind, you can see them at the right counting stations in the east of the country. The species first bred in the Netherlands in 1976, but that did not persist. Regular breeding only started in 2010, and the population is currently growing exponentially, with 41 breeding pairs recorded last year, mainly in the eastern part of the country. Despite their size, confirming a breeding event is not easy. A longer presence of adult birds outside the migration period could indicate local breeding. Then it's a matter of spending time observing where the birds may enter the forest. The call of the red kites resembles that of the common buzzard, but it rises and falls more quickly. This was the cattle egret, the smallest of the white egrets and one whose rapid expansion is hard to miss. After a few breeding attempts years ago, the species has really taken off. While only a modest 3 breeding pairs were recorded in 2021 and 2022, by 2024 the number had risen to 41 pairs. Breeding mainly occurs where other colonial breeders are present, such as cormorants, spoonbills, little and great egrets, grey herons, sometimes purple herons, and occasionally even night herons. However, you can find them throughout the Netherlands year-round. If you see livestock in a field, check whether one of these small white egrets is among them. Next is the short-eared owl, a favorite target for bird photographers with its striking yellow eyes. It helps that this species is one of the most diurnal owls. It is nomadic, following areas with high mouse populations where it comes to breed. The number of breeding pairs in the Netherlands can fluctuate significantly. On average, the population has declined slightly since the 1990s, but peaks occurred in 2014, 2019 and 2023 with around 100 breeding pairs. In other years, only 10 to 20 pairs breed, mostly in the north of the country, with Friesland as the most popular breeding location, both on the Wadden Islands and mainland grasslands. Unlike most owls, this species is not very vocal. The best chance to find it outside winter is in areas with high mouse densities, often indicated by the presence of many buzzards and kestrels. This was the little bittern, our smallest heron. Unlike the cattle egret, it is not currently booming, but it does seem to be slowly recovering. The steady increase has no clear explanation. In the past, the species was a much more common breeder, but habitat degradation and likely high mortality during migration and in wintering areas caused numbers to drop. Perhaps conditions in the wintering areas are now improving, contributing to the recovery here. Efforts are being made to improve reed marsh habitats, but the species does not seem overly picky about breeding sites and occasionally appears at new locations that may be abandoned after a year or two. It is most often noticed in reed edges along small ponds near urban areas, though this may partly reflect higher observer density there. In areas with little competition, once paired, the species can be very quiet, making detection difficult. In May, search ponds with relatively tall reeds at the edges, though it does not need to be old, and listen for the barking call. To an untrained ear, the call may be confused with a great crested grebe or even a dog, so stay alert. This was the faint call of the pendulum tit, a species that made a surprising expansion as a breeding bird in the Netherlands during the second half of the 20th century, but later disappeared again for no clear reason. In the 1990s, there were about 250 breeding pairs, but today only around 20 remain, with slight fluctuations from year to year. Ring recoveries show some exchange of breeding birds between countries, but unfortunately the species has declined not only in the Netherlands but across the whole of Western Europe. Reed marshes with cattails and willows are its preferred habitat. There is enough of this habitat, but it's always worth checking for nests. Pendulum tits can be very secretive and hidden during nest building. Their call can sometimes be confused with the faint call of female blackbirds, but the pendulum tit's call is distinctly more drawn out. Next is a real crowd pleaser, the European bee-eater. Originally a Mediterranean species, it is increasingly appearing further north, though the expansion of its breeding range is slow and sporadic. Breeding success in the Netherlands depends heavily on the weather while the parents are feeding the chicks. Cold and rainy conditions reduce the bird's ability to catch enough dragonflies, bees and bumblebees, which can lead to chick starvation. Bee-eaters often return to previous breeding sites, but not all birds come back. A poor year can lead a colony to be abandoned, as happened at Lauwersmeer. In locations with plenty of dragonflies and bumblebees, and where birds can dig nests in sandpits, it's worth checking outside the migration period, which continues well into May, for calling birds. Even a modest sand mound can be enough for a few pairs to breed. Checking areas with sand martin colonies that also dig burrows in sandpits can pay off. After some practice, the call is unmistakable, though strangely one must be careful not to confuse it with groups of flying avocets. Many people probably aren't familiar with the call of this redneck grebe. For big days I used to do. It was actually very useful to include them at night. Apparently not difficult, as like the great crested grebe, this species sometimes calls at night. Although the number of wintering redneck grebes has strongly declined, the breeding population shows a slight upward trend, though still only 10 to 15 pairs. The former most important site, Diependal, now hosts just a single pair, while in Ameland the number of pairs has increased. In Drenthe, the species breeds in small ponds, while in Ameland they use a dune lake. Watching grebes carefully is key to discovering potential new breeding cases. The species can be very secretive, staying hidden in vegetation for long periods, so knowing the call can be beneficial to locating them. For most birders, this is a familiar song. The common rosefinch frequently pops up through Dutch-birder luts, often out of the pocket, so to speak. Although other sounds can be said, many keep the rosefinch as the default. The species first bred in the Netherlands in 1987, and numbers quickly increased to around 60 breeding pairs, half of them in Flevoland. Afterwards, the population declined slightly and shifted toward the coast, from the Wadden Islands to the Zeeland dunes. Currently, the number of breeding pairs is estimated between 10 and 20, though recent years seem to have fewer than the redneck grebe, which is why the species ranks one step higher. Most breeding sites are kept secret, so the exact number of pairs is unclear. The best time to look for this species is late May, a typical arrival time for more eastern species that occasionally appear here, like the Blyth's reed warbler, Greenish Warbler and rosy starling. Now we've reached the top 5. Here we hear the incredibly fast song of the melodious warbler, the southern counterpart of the Icterian warbler, slowly gaining ground in the Netherlands. The southern 3 provinces are the main source of observations, although the species can be found throughout the country. Its song is a rapid sequence of rolling and bubbling sounds, with occasional tones that clearly hint at its relation to the Icterian warbler. It also imitates other species at times, sometimes resembling the marsh warbler, although they are found in different habitats. If you know the Icterian, marsh and garden warbler well, you'll eventually be able to pick out the melodious warbler. May is the best time to find one, although unpaired males sing longer and your chances in June are not zero. Low shrubs with occasional trees are ideal for searching. Most singing males probably do not breed here, and the estimated number of true breeding cases is around 10 per year. This was the call of the black kite, another emerging breeding bird, though its increase is much slower than the red kite. The species had bred annually in the Netherlands since 2009. For a long time there were only 1 to 3 pairs. Last year there were 6. The black kite is one of the most common raptors across much of its range, but in the Netherlands it remains a rare species. Its migration occurs later than the red kite, with the main movement starting in April. In autumn, it's also seen much less often on passage than the red kite. Like the red kite, your best chance to find it during the breeding season is in the southeast of the country. Its call is high and shrill, very drawn out, with a slight tremor at the end. Although ospreys are not very difficult to encounter during migration, since they can linger in one spot for a long time in summer, they remain very rare breeders, with just 3 pairs in 2024 and 4 to 5 in 2025. Unlike most other raptors on this list, their nests are relatively easy to see, often high in dead trees or even on power pylons. Currently, breeding is limited to the southwest of the country, though there are plenty of suitable sites elsewhere. Any location where white-tailed eagles breed would also be suitable for ospreys, so keep an eye out from mid-March for potential nest building. Their call is like many other raptors, high and shrill. A single call is short, followed by 4 repeated calls. This is the very recognizable call of the hoopoe, which literally sings its own name. Once a breeding bird in the Netherlands, it later disappeared, but recently numbers appear to be increasing, with a record 9 breeding pairs in 2023. Last year, however, there were only 5 pairs, so numbers fluctuate. The hoopoe is a cavity breeder, using holes made primarily by woodpeckers. The best chance to find a breeding pair is to listen for calling birds in April. Most hoopoes seen in the Netherlands are migrants, and many are silents, so a calling bird stands out. That said, not all calling birds will actually breed, being at the edge of its range. There may not be enough females for all singing males to find a mate. Breeding pairs have so far been observed almost entirely in the southern half of the country, from the coast to the German border. Finally, we reach the white-throated dipper, the rarest yet regular breeder in the Netherlands. Currently, there are about 3 breeding pairs, though sightings during the breeding season are often kept secret. Most people know the species from wintering black-bellied subspecies, which are usually publicly observed and are real crowd pleasers. The species breeds just across the border in Belgium and Germany, but its preferred habitat, small, clear, fast-flowing streams with a stony bottom, is scarce outside Limburg, so it will never be a common breeder in the Netherlands. To try finding it yourself, focus on the small, fast-flowing streams. Its song is unmistakable, though easily drowned out by the flowing water. Interestingly, the species readily uses nest boxes, which might be a good idea to provide in Limburg if it isn't already being done. That was it. Let me know if you want to see more videos like this. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.